What if the very toughness that made you a star is the same thing that gets you killed? He walked onto the field that morning, a Pro Bowl tackle. By sundown, he was fighting for his life. But what happened in between, what went unnoticed, what was ignored, would change football forever.
Korey Stringer was an NFL player with the Minnesota Vikings.
Athletes have died on the first day of August due to heat. That's more than any other day of the year. Heat killed an Ohio football star. His death is what started the protection of millions of athletes nationwide.
It was supposed to be just another summer training day. Korey Stringer, a 335-pound offensive tackle for the Minnesota Vikings, was entering his 6th NFL season. A gentle giant known for his grit, loyalty, and quiet determination. But on July 31, 2001, under a punishing sun, something went terribly wrong. The air in Mankato, Minnesota, felt like breathing through a wet towel. Temperatures soared past 90 degrees. The heat index, over 110. Still, practice went on, and Stringer, drenched in sweat, his steps heavy, his body signaling distress, kept pushing. He vomited, twice, then again. Teammates saw it, coaches noticed. But back then, toughing it out wasn't just encouraged, it was expected. Korey collapsed before the session ended. By nightfall, his body temperature had reached 108 degrees. Hours later, the unthinkable happened. Korey Stringer died of heat stroke. It was the first heat-related death in modern NFL history, and it could have been prevented. His death shocked the sports world and forced a brutal reckoning. How could one of the league's toughest fall victim to something so simple as heat? This is the story of the fatal practice that claimed Korey Stringer's life, and the legacy he left behind that's saving lives today. But to understand what went wrong, you have to understand who Korey really was. Before he was a Pro Bowler, before the fame and the headlines, Korey Stringer was just a kid from Warren, Ohio, with dreams bigger than his oversized shoulder pads. Born on May 8, 1974, Korey stood out early. Not just for his size, but for his rare mix of strength, agility, and heart. On the high school field, he didn't just play football, he owned the line of scrimmage. His dominance earned him All-American honors and a ticket to one of college football's biggest stages, Ohio State University. At Ohio State, he became a wall of muscle and discipline. As an offensive lineman, he wasn't flashy, but he made sure the quarterback stayed clean. By his junior year, he was a consensus All-American, a name whispered by NFL scouts across the country. After that season, he declared for the NFL draft, ready to take his game to the next level. In 1995, the Minnesota Vikings called his name in the first round, 24th overall. Over the next 6 seasons, Stringer would become a cornerstone of the Vikings' offensive line. In 2000, he reached his peak, a Pro Bowl selection that cemented his place among the league's elite. But for those who knew him, Korey's greatness wasn't just in the stats. He was the guy who showed up early, stayed late, and gave rookies quiet encouragement when cameras weren't rolling. A gentle giant with a relentless work ethic, dedicated, humble, and always willing to support others. A man whose silence spoke louder than some players' trash talk. He was entering the prime of his career. He had more to give, more to prove, but no one knew. His time was already running out. What happened next would challenge everything the NFL thought it knew about safety. But before we continue with that, if Korey's story has moved you so far, hit that like button or share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Stories like his deserve to live on. Let's make sure he's never forgotten. Subscribe for more real stories from the world of extreme sports. July 31, 2001. It started like any other day at training camp. The Minnesota Vikings were grinding through the summer heat in Mankato, Minnesota, focused on the season ahead, pushing bodies to the limit. But on this day, something felt off. By mid-morning, the heat was punishing. The sun sat heavy in the sky, radiating down like a blowtorch. Temperatures climbed into the 90s. The heat index surged past 110. It was the kind of weather that melted cleats into turf. Still, practice didn't slow down. It wasn't just encouraged, it was demanded. Toughness was the culture. Pain was part of the process. And Korey Stringer, known for his iron will, wasn't about to ask for rest. But something was wrong. He vomited once, then again. His breath came in ragged gasps. His jersey clung to him like wet concrete. Teammates exchanged glances. Coaches saw him struggling. But Korey kept going. Because that's what you did. You pushed through until he couldn't. After practice, his massive frame gave out. He collapsed. Trainers rushed over. His skin was hot to the touch, alarmingly hot. He wasn't responding. They rushed him to Emmanuel St. Joseph's Hospital. Doctors discovered his core temperature had skyrocketed, 108 degrees Fahrenheit. At that level, cells die. Organs shut down. The body turns against itself. They did everything they could: ice, fluids, intubation, cooling measures. But the damage was already done. Early the next morning, Korey Stringer was gone. A healthy 27-year-old Pro Bowl lineman had died from heat stroke. Not in a game, not from a hit, but from heat. And the worst part? It didn't have to happen. At the time, most NFL camps had no cold immersion tubs, no mist tents, no real-time body temp monitoring. Hydration was a suggestion, not a system. And the culture? It rewarded silence, not self-preservation. Korey's death ripped the blindfold off. It wasn't just a tragedy. It was an exposure, a brutal revelation that even the strongest could fall, and that the systems meant to protect them weren't ready. But what actually happens inside the body when heat becomes deadly? The answer is even more terrifying and more preventable than you think. Exertional heat stroke. It sounds clinical, almost technical, but what it really is deadly. It's one of the most dangerous conditions an athlete can face. And yet, it's also one of the most preventable. Heat stroke occurs when the body's internal temperature rises too high, too fast, and the brain's thermostat stops working. It's like a car engine redlining, with no radiator, no relief, no warning light. In extreme cases, like Korey Stringer's, the core temperature can spike past 105, even 108 degrees. At that point, the body begins to cook itself from the inside out. And here's the terrifying part. It can happen in minutes. You don't have to be out of shape. You don't have to be careless. You just have to be hot and ignored. The symptoms creep in like shadows: confusion, dizziness, pounding heart, nausea, vomiting, sweating profusely, or suddenly not at all, and then collapse. In 2001, most teams, including the Vikings, lacked the protocols we now see as basic. No mandatory hydration breaks, no cold immersion tubs, no misting fans, no core temperature sensors, no urgency. Back then, toughness was king. No pain, no gain. If you pulled yourself out, you were soft. If you spoke up, you risked being benched. Korey Stringer's death shattered that illusion. He wasn't weak, he wasn't unfit. He was an elite athlete, killed by a system that didn't see the warning signs, or worse, chose to ignore them. It forced the sports world to face a brutal truth. Even the strongest can fall when the culture tells them to stay quiet while their body screams. The NFL had no choice but to change. But could the league transform fast enough to prevent the next tragedy? The NFL was stunned. Korey Stringer, a Pro Bowl tackle in his prime, was dead. Not from a collision, not from a freak injury, but from something as preventable as heat stroke. Fans were heartbroken, teammates were shattered. And the league? It faced a firestorm of questions. How could this happen? Under the watch of one of the NFL's most respected franchises, the criticism came fast, and it was justified. Within weeks, the NFL was forced to take a long, hard look at its training culture. Heat illness, once a background concern, became front-page news. And change, real change, finally began. Teams were now required to put athlete safety first. More hydration stations, mandatory breaks during high heat conditions, emergency response protocols on standby. But rules weren't the only thing that changed. Mindsets did too. The old-school mantra of play through the pain, it started to crumble. Players were now told, if you feel something's wrong, speak up. Trainers were upgraded with tools they should have had all along. Rectal thermometers for accurate core temps, cold immersion tubs, misting fans. Locker rooms that once echoed with bravado began to whisper a new language: safety, awareness, survival. The NFL also teamed up with top medical experts to develop new guidelines, science-backed, evidence-based, life-saving. These weren't just PR moves. They became the blueprint for how modern training camps are run. And the ripple effect? It didn't stop with the pros. High schools took notice. Colleges reevaluated. Youth leagues across the country rewrote their playbooks, not for touchdowns, but for protection. Because this wasn't just an NFL issue. This was a sports-wide reckoning. And while those reforms have protected countless athletes since 2001, they came at a devastating price. A husband, a father, a teammate, gone. But Korey's story didn't end on that practice field, because what his family did next would save lives around the world. From unimaginable loss came purpose. In 2010, 9 years after Korey's death, his widow, Korey Stringer, refused to let the story end in a hospital room. Instead, she turned heartbreak into action. Together with leading experts at the University of Connecticut, she founded the Korey Stringer Institute, a national organization with a single mission: to save lives. Not just in the NFL, not just in elite sports, everywhere.
10 years ago this week, Korey Stringer was a 27-year-old offensive lineman for the Minnesota Vikings, coming off a Pro Bowl season. Then he died during training camp from complications of heat stroke.
Since then, his widow, Kelsey, has worked to prevent similar tragedies. And last year, she helped to start the Korey Stringer Institute at the University of Connecticut.
From high school fields to small-town gyms, from college programs to community parks, KSI has one goal: to prevent what went wrong for Korey. And they're not just raising awareness, they're rewriting the playbook. The Korey Stringer Institute leads research, publishes best practices, trains athletic staff, influences national policy. They advise state legislatures, shape heat safety protocols, and make sure that no matter how humble the field, the right tools are ready. Cold water immersion tubs? Standardized because of them. Hydration programs? Advocated by them. Certified emergency plans for extreme heat? Driven by their fight. What began in grief became a movement. And it's working. Thousands of coaches, athletes, and parents have been trained. Hundreds of incidents prevented because someone recognized what Korey's body tried to say that day. The Korey Stringer Institute is more than a foundation. It's Korey's voice, his protection, his presence, for every athlete who dreams of playing the game they love. And every time a player walks off the field on a blistering day, Korey's story walks with them. But before we leave the field behind, there's one final lesson Korey's story still has to teach us. Korey Stringer was more than a football player. He was a husband, a father, a friend, a man who gave everything to the game, to his team, to the people he loved. And on July 31st, 2001, that game took everything from him. His death wasn't a freak accident. It was a warning the sports world had ignored for far too long. A warning about heat, about ego, about a culture that asked for silence when the body was screaming for help. But from that warning came change. Today, countless athletes step onto fields that are safer, not because of a new rule book, but because of Korey. They hydrate more, they rest more. Trainers know the signs, coaches ask questions. Emergency plans are in place. Protocols are written. Because one man collapsed, and the world finally paid attention. So the next time you see a player drop to a knee during a heat wave, don't call it weakness, call it wisdom. The next time a coach cancels practice because the temperature's too high, don't call it soft. Call it survival. And the next time someone says, they just don't make them tough like they used to, remember Korey Stringer. Because toughness didn't kill him, silence did. And thanks to the legacy he left behind, that silence is finally being broken. If this story moved you even a little, please give this video a like, subscribe, and share it. You never know who needs to hear it. On a field, in a locker room, on the sidelines. Awareness can save lives. And today, you might be the one who passes it on.